Chapter 4. Though Bolthir had described the journey between Rabanastre and Nalbina as lasting a mere 3 hours, he had first made the trip in an imperial caravan on well-tread roads. Crossing the desert on foot while avoiding any known path or trading post, and while keeping a torture-weary prisoner in tow, proved a trek of 2 days and 1 night, landing them back at the city on the 3rd morning. It may have perhaps been sooner if Bolthir hadn't insisted on stopping with the advent of even the slightest sign of food, water, or shade, and if he hadn't gotten them utterly lost, and spent half a day bickering with Fran and Vieren before Bosch finally recalled a few landmarks and set them back on track. Von remained wary of his company for the whole of the journey, distrusting Bosch for the obvious reasons, and distrusting Fran and Bolthir because of their very nature. None of them had any reason to stick with him, and all could just as well kill him and spare themselves the trouble. Bolthir had spoken of the law of exchange, but Von remained unsure of how highly such a code could be esteemed, and Fran appeared to prefer ignoring the boy, though he did on occasion get the feeling that they were talking about him in their private tongue. Viera were rumored as merciless beasts, and Von's mind sputtered at the possibilities of how Bolthir could speak their language when no other human in recorded history ever had. The obvious answer would be that Fran taught him, but with the way Viera so shunned the human race, this seemed highly suspect. Bosch struggled to keep up the pace, his head pounding and his legs sore with disuse, but the fresh air nevertheless did him good, for within half an hour of leaving the fortress he appeared a good 5 years younger. His comment regarding having had his leg broken seemed to ring true, for he limped heavily even after regaining a sufficient steadiness, and for the first hour or so he appeared to cower before the sun, slackening his posture in the midst of its glare, and keeping his gaze trained weakly on the sand before him, but after a while his eyes adjusted and his shoulders straightened, and on occasion he even resembled something of a knight, though he retained the wild, desperate countenance of a caged beast. This reinforced both Von's resolve to stay out of trouble for his sister's sake, and his purpose for seeking to aid the resistance. He certainly didn't want to face what Bosch had, and yet he could not stand idly by while a country committed such atrocities without reprimand. As his confusion mounted, however, so did his resolution to burden Penelo no further, and he decided that he would not trouble himself with such decisions until honestly consulting her. When they finally reached the city gate, they all took a moment to gaze with relief upon the gleaming peaks of the great buildings and the shining steel of the airships before Bolthir turned to the group proudly and said, "There, see? I told you I knew where we were going." Bosch shook his head with an exhausted smile. "Bald here. Thank you. Don't mention it, literally. And I'd avoid crowds if I were you. In this town you're still a traitor, you know. The resistance will surely find me soon," Bosch explained, starting down North Street. "Let's hope they do before Vane does," Bolthir added. "Farewell." "Whatever." Fran stepped up beside Bolthir and watched Bosch limp out of sight. "You're losing your edge," she noted. "I owe his brother a favor," he defended. "So much for leaving the past where it belongs," she quipped in Vieren. Ignoring this, Bolthir turned to Von. "Think he'll last?" "Not more than an hour," the boy answered. He laughed. "Don't suppose you'd be interested in sky pirating, would you?" "I would if I didn't have my little sister to take care of." "Oh, is that who that was? I see. Well, we'll be in town a while longer. Search through the pubs if you change your mind." "Thanks, but I won't." "Very well, then.
But just remember you're a fugitive now, too. Try and stay low for a while. Finally, something I'm good at. Right. Give our regards to your sister.
They headed east, leaving him at the gate to ponder his dismal future. There was no use in wallowing, though, and he quickly got on his way. His first order of business, as always, was seeking out Penelo to ensure that she was all right and to assure her that he was, too. A sweet sister she was, but worry often got the best of her, and he, unfortunately, had from a very young age been quite apt at generating it. He searched first by the great fountain on the south side of the city, where she often gathered with the other girls to dance and giggle and escape the boys, but she was not there, and Vaughn had no desire to start up some irritatingly meaningless conversation with those who were. Next he sought her in the market, thinking that if she was not playing, she would most certainly be working. This, too, proved fruitless, however, and rather time-consuming, for the streets were glutted with shoppers, making his search all the more difficult. Moving on, he headed to Miguelo's shop, but decided against revealing himself to Miguelo just yet, for he seemed very preoccupied and certainly didn't need news of Vaughn's prison break complicating things. Compounding this, the sun had already slipped below the horizon, and the sky had begun to darken quite quickly, so Vaughn decided to seek Penelo out at a more godly hour, and settled in behind a sweet-smelling bakery for the night. True, a bed of some kind would be waiting for him at Miguelo's home. Miguelo always found room, but his same fears cowed him into avoidance once more, and he certainly didn't want to raise such concerns so late in the day. Despite being guilt-ridden and dead-tired, he couldn't for the life of him fall asleep. His thoughts continually drifted over explaining himself to Penelo and justifying Bosch's story and traveling the world with Bolthier and Fran. He wondered if he was in fact causing Penelo more worry by not revealing his safety to her immediately, or if the resistance would meet Bosch with joy or hatred. Oddly, his concerns seemed most laborious in considering the possibilities that would open to him should he become a sky pirate. He would face no laws or loyalties, he could provide for Penelo without dealing with the Empire. And yet there would always be the threat of bounty hunters. For once, Vaughn considered the world objectively, and found that Penelo had indeed been right all along. Some things could be changed, others simply had to be tolerated. It was this thought that at last put him to sleep. As the sun rose the next morning, though, his mind again flooded with worries of all manner, and he finally accepted that the best path was one of honesty, and, after stealing himself some breakfast, he set out in search of Penelo. He checked for the second time her usual sanctuaries with the same results, and resorted to speaking to Miguelo, though he greatly preferred to face him with Penelo at his side. However, as he lingered outside the door of Miguelo's shop, mentally reciting his explanation, he all at once remembered the promise he had made to old Dallin. He could always count on finding Dallin in the same place, and he wasn't at all fond of being kept waiting, and furthermore, Penelo had been quite enamored with his ramblings since her early days, so surely he would reveal her whereabouts. Perhaps confrontation with Miguelo could be put off a bit longer after all. Vaughn smiled and headed for the north alley. Sure enough, old Dallin sat in his usual corner, a flock of children enraptured at his feet as he fancifully regaled them with the tale of how he first learned to tie his shoes. Vaughn had listened to this story before, many times, in fact, and couldn't withhold a smile as he approached. Dallin, however, grew far more excited than the kids upon catching sight of him and called out exuberantly down the alley.
Vaughn! You baneful boy! Get over here!
Rolling his eyes, Vaughn obliged, and old Dallin shooed the children away.
Off with you, wee ones! Go do something remarkable. Go. Hey, Dallin,
said Vaughn.
Don't you hate me?
He replied with a laugh.
What's this I hear about you cavorting with the Kingslayer? What? Hey, there was no cavorting, I didn't have a choice. And how did you know about that? The same way I knew how to find the national treasure, of course. Oh, about that.
Vaughn ran a hand through his hair, but quickly realized his own childishness and adopted a more manly stance.
I didn't really. Well, I ended up in Nalbina for that. So I've heard,
Dallin said with a poorly subdued smile.
But please tell me I would not be correct in assuming that you were not successful in retrieving the Dusk Shard.
His posture slackened back almost immediately.
Sorry. The Imperials confiscated it. Then it is in Vane's hands now. I guess so. Oh, no. That is dreadful. Well, it wasn't my fault,
Vaughn whined.
I got ambushed by sky pirates. Yes, I've heard of that as well.
Old Dallin shot him an exceptionally patronizing glare.
Bolthir Bonanza, I believe, captain of the Strahl. He is not one to be trifled with. I didn't think he was so bad. I mean, he screwed everything up for me, but he got me out of it. A favor from a pirate? That never bodes well, my boy. From what I've heard, this Bolthir is not one to be trusted. I had a feeling. You know, he even offered to let me go with him, be a sky pirate and all that. And you turned him down. I couldn't just leave Penelo, especially not for pirating. She'd be so disappointed. Ha!
He slapped his knee with more gusto than a man of his age and stature seemed capable of mustering.
You would do well to change your mind. If Solidaire holds the Dusk Shard, Dalmasca is finished.
This struck a nerve. Vaughn had seen for himself the courage and determination of the resistance, and would not hear its goal passed off as a mere fantasy.
Hey, don't say that. The resistance is gonna take him on again. Resistance?
The old man replied.
What resistance? They've captured Lady Amalia, and with the Dusk Shard at their disposal. Ah, this is bad, very, very bad. Lady Amalia?
Vaughn scoffed.
She seemed kind of forceful to me. Yes, just as a proper lady should be. Now, if you will not abandon Dalmasca, surely you will fight for her, yes?
Vaughn shrugged.
Yeah, sure. Say it like you mean it. Hey.
Dallin held his head dismally.
Ah, pathetic. Listen. The Imperials have me under close watch. I must ask a favor of you. Okay.
Reaching into a toppled garbage can beside him, old Dallin struggled under the weight of a sheathed sword, then offered it up to Vaughn.
There's a fellow by the name of Azelas Vossler down in the South Alley,
he explained.
I need you to bring this sword to him. Not bad.
Vaughn inspected the sword with spellbound fascination, not daring to remove it from its glistening case for fear of disrespecting the purpose he suspected it served.
A sword of the old order, that is,
Dallin confirmed.
Captain Vossler is a Dalmascan knight, so you'd better show some respect. Right, but, this wouldn't by any chance have something to do with the resistance, would it? Ah, you're brighter than you look, my boy, but I'm afraid I am not at liberty to divulge such things. Just speak my name when you arrive, that should be enough to get you in. Mind you, you are to deliver it to him personally.
Vaughn nodded, already stepping back in his eager hurry to fulfill the old man's request.
I will. And give your Kingslayer my best regards,
Dallin called after him as he started out of the alley.
It's about time we got some old Landesians back in action.
He was halfway to his destination when he realized that he had completely forgotten to ask old Dallin of Penello's disappearance. This could no longer be a mere coincidence. If Vaughn couldn't find her, something had to be wrong. He had one last hope, though. He had not actually spoken to Miguelo just yet, and he could always count on Miguelo to take care of his little sister. But if he hadn't seen her, Vaughn feared for the future. At any rate, somewhere in Robinaster hid a knight in need of his sword, and Vaughn had no right to deprive his country of one of its saviors, so he decided that supporting the resistance took priority and continued on to the South Alley. And yet as he walked, he could not help but feel a small amount of pride overcome him, for even in his state of worry, he knew that Penello would be pleased with him for aiding their country without resorting to violence or thievery. Though he still fought the urge to abandon everything and join the resistance, he could not live with himself if he left Penello behind, and it seemed that he had at last found some middle ground, and simply holding the sword of a knight succeeded in making him feel like one. The Order of Dalmascan Knights kept to strict rituals of initiation that had been passed down since the time of the dynasty king. For each knight that pledged fealty to the crown, a new sword was forged of the finest metals Dalmasca had to offer, and with this sword, the reigning king swore in his newest servant, so that no two knights should ever swear upon the same blade. In this way, the knights kept with them their promise, an ever-present reminder of who and what they fought for. Vaughn had never actually seen an initiation ceremony, for only the royals and other knights were permitted to attend, but he had heard enough about them and couldn't resist drawing the sword from its sheath and taking a peek. What he saw cast a whole new light on old Dallin's simple appeal. Every sword had engraved along its blade the name of the knight who would bear it, but where Vaughn expected to find Captain Vossler's name, he instead found Bosch's. He had not considered what would become of Bosch's sword after his supposed execution, though he knew of the traditional means of disposal for a knight's initiation blade. If the knight died honorably, it was to be buried with him; if he died dishonorably, it would either be melted down and forgotten, or passed on to a fellow knight with the hopes of seeking redemption beyond death. Vaughn pondered this for a moment, unable to come up with a valid explanation. The only one to survive the attack had been his poor brother, Rex, and he was a mere foot soldier. Besides, he had no sword. Upon being taken from the site to the royal infirmary, Bosch had supposedly disarmed him before wounding him. Clearly, he did not give it to Azelas, for Vaughn now sought to deliver it to him himself. At last, it hit him, Gabranth. In order to effectively impersonate Bosch, Gabranth would have to have taken his sword. But had he kept it all this time? The resistance would surely have seen it destroyed while under the impression that Bosch had betrayed them, so he must have given it up to them after learning of Bosch's escape from Nalbina. In spite of his growing concern for Penello, Vaughn smiled faintly. Upon reaching the South Alley, he found only a few homeless men loitering about amid several garbage cans and splintered shipping crates, but he had discovered while being arrested with the resistance members after the fate that they indeed hid themselves in all forms and places, and thus simply approached one and spoke.
Excuse me. I'm looking for Azelas Vossler, old Dallin sent me.
Good, the man replied, getting to his feet.
we've been expecting you. Right in here.
He led him behind a stack of crates, then through a hidden drainpipe into the sewers. The stone foundations of Rabanastre proved a true wonder in their impeccable structure, and Vaughn thought for sure that his eyes deceived him when the man pressed in a series of stones that triggered a mechanism within the wall.
These chambers were built to house royals in case of invasion,
the resistance member explained upon noticing Vaughn's awe.
Whoa!
He replied faintly. Within the chamber stood another door, this one plain and wooden, which the man knocked on as one would when paying a simple daily visit to a friend. Another man opened the door, and the first saluted.
Sir, the messenger.
Right, he said, dismissing the first soldier and stepping aside to let Vaughn in.
Come along.
He followed obediently, finding the room beyond to be something of an infirmary. Along the wall several cots had been set up, and food and medical supplies teetered in high stacks against the support columns, but the resistance soldiers present appeared to be in good health or at least nearing the final stages of recovery, for they sat gathered in clusters, some playing cards, some haphazardly working to regain their fencing skills, and most, it seemed, engaging in a rather heated debate regarding Bosch. Vaughn sought to question his new guide on the matter, but he instead deposited the boy in a corner, and with a simple "wait here" disappeared behind another door. At a loss, Vaughn shifted the sword and leaned against the wall, listening in on the discussion.
Then what do you think of Andor's proclamation? Are you suggesting they fooled even the Marquis? It's a stretch, I know, but if Gabranth really did kill the king, that would explain everything, wouldn't it? The world's explanations are never so easy, and even if that were the case, the captain would still be brother to a judge. I see no reason to trust such a man. But... well, come on. It's Bosch. Just 2 years ago we would have charged into battle at his word. 2 years is a long time. His word alone convinces me of nothing. I'd take his word over that of a mouthpiece Marquis. Then you name Rex liar with him.
Suddenly, a new voice entered the conversation,
just the opposite. Rex was the witness they needed, he bears no blame.
Vaughn glanced about the room to identify the speaker, finding him to be a tall, imposing man of perhaps 40, though his eyes bore far more youth than the rest of his countenance, and his dark hair appeared to be turning prematurely grey. The others parted at his presence. Clearly, this was Captain Vossler, and Vaughn saw as they stepped aside that beside him stood Bosch, looking wholly like a new man. Though he still emanated a need to be properly fed, he now appeared to be nearing his mid-30s, with bright green eyes and warm blonde hair, even his limp was barely noticeable. Vaughn hardly recognized him, but he seemed to notice Vaughn immediately.
Vaughn. Hi.
The man who had led him in gestured to him while addressing Azelas.
The messenger, sir. Rex brother,
Bosch added. Azelas stepped up to Vaughn, who quickly held out the sword.
Spitting image. You knew him, too?
Vaughn asked.
Not well,
he answered, taking the sword and looking it over.
He was a good kid, good soldier.
Satisfied with the blade, he once again met Vaughn's eyes.
Certainly no liar, right? He thought it was Bosch,
Vaughn said carefully.
That doesn't mean it was.
Azelas smirked and turned to Bosch.
Your words may convince a child such as this, but they weigh far too lightly on the scales for my taste. Our paths will remain separate. Do you not think Amalia worth saving?
Bosch asked quietly.
How many times must I tell you to leave her to me?
The other soldiers tensed, but Bosch took such words as nothing more than a facade at best.
You may be able to regroup the Dalmascan forces, he contended, but without her, our sources in Buzherba and Nubradia are as good as lost. She isn't just your toy anymore, she belongs to all of us. Toy?
Azelas scoffed.
You know very well that she belongs to no one. Try telling her that.
Von shifted, feeling deeply the nervousness of those around him. Bosch had seemed quite sensible in the dungeon and the desert, yet here he stood, daring to argue with an apparent leader of the resistance. Despite his better judgment, the boy began to hope that he hadn't freed Bosch only to see him killed. But it quickly became clear that the two would not harm each other, for Azelas' stony expression softened, if only slightly, and he glanced briefly to the ground before speaking in a low, solemn voice.
You don't understand. She only let them catch her in order to save me. I would have already been executed by now, but they need her alive. And so you leave her in their hands?
Bosch asked.
Of course not.
Azelas growled.
We have already attempted to rescue her, but she was not in the palace. Our contacts tell us she has been taken from Robinaster on Vane's order. Once her location is confirmed, we will set out again.
Bosch cast an almost bored glance off to the side and suppressed a sigh.
We doesn't include me, does it? The night we moved against Vane, he knew,
Azelas answered with bitter resign.
I will not chance such disadvantage again. I must treat you as I would Ondor, as I would any abitur of the Empire. I cannot blame you for your caution, but you know what I have done to her. How am I to live with myself if she still holds me responsible? What reaction do you expect to receive? It will take far more than an apology, and even then, things will not simply go back to the way they were. She'd sooner kill you than forgive you. Without her leadership, the resistance is powerless, and given your history, you should be, too. I will not risk another betrayal.
Anxious stares were exchanged among the soldiers, but Bosch brushed it off without a second thought.
Then what will you do? Hold me here in chains?
Azelas let out a huff of grudging admiration.
Experience dictates that would do me no good. Some things never change, do they? Listen to me, Ronsenberg. Your cage may have no bars, but it is a cage nonetheless. The eyes of the resistance watch unblinking. Let them watch. I know something of cages.
Azelas smirked slightly, but hid it well, holding the sword out to Bosch with a critical, if not optimistic, glare of expectation.
Then prove us wrong.
Bosch mirrored the look of bemusement and took the sword, then silently turned and left. Accusations quickly descended on Azelas, both from those who didn't trust Bosch and from those who did, but Von had no further interest in the tired debate and took his leave, hurrying down the alley after the Landesian.
Bosch! Haven't you had your fill of trouble yet?
Von stopped at his side and explained with resigned fatigue.
Look! I just... Do you even have any idea what you're doing? I'll figure it out,
Bosch answered a tad coldly.
Well, why don't you start with old Dallin? Old who? Dallin. He's this Buzherban guy who shacks up in the North Alley. He talked about Amalia, I think he's an undercover contact.
A moment of silence stilled between them while Bosch warily studied the boy, bedding down the inherent suspicion that 2 years of torture had bred in him, and trying to remind himself that this was Vaughn, not Rex.
You really do think I'm innocent, don't you?
He asked at length. Vaughn managed something of a lame grin, unsure of how to answer such a question.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think you are, that's still a long way from knowing. I'll take what I can get,
he said with a soft smile.
Thanks for the advice. Good luck.
As he walked away, Vaughn at last saw in him a true reflection of who he had once been, not a murderer, not a traitor, and not in the least the beaten, broken, savage creature he had first encountered in Nalbina's torture chamber. Oddly, Vaughn felt a deep connection to Rex for the first time in nearly 2 years, and for a moment almost saw some of himself in Bosch, and wondered if there had ever been a defining moment in which he regained his own sense of self, if Penelo had noticed that he had ceased his mourning for his brother and taken his life back. It was a truly amazing sight, to be sure. Bosch did not flinch or shudder or cower before anything, but just walked with a natural human confidence, shoulders back, head high, seemingly recovered of all his detention had wrought, save for a black eye and the slight limp still marring his gait. Vaughn hoped he had shown such strength for Penelo. He hoped Rex's death had not claimed him as well. And yet his fear for Penelo's disappearance increased with every moment he did not seek her out, prompting him to quickly trek across the city to Miguelo's shop. He did not know how he would explain himself to Miguelo, but he now realized that he could no longer put it off. He would have to take responsibility sooner or later, and procrastinating served only to strain his nerves even further. He passed through the public floor to the storage room where Miguelo could most often be found, stopping only to greet a few of the city's younger orphans and to prepare himself for the inevitable onslaught of guilty that Miguelo always managed to effectively unleash on him. The old man sat hunched over a small oaken desk, wearily reading over a letter of some kind. Vaughn hadn't in years seen him so sullen, and it certainly wasn't his nature to be putting off his work at this time of day. Normally, he'd be taking inventory while singing some jolly tune, or giving the duty to one of his kids while he chatted with customers. Vaughn once again put aside his search and stepped up behind Miguelo with quiet curiosity.
Something wrong?
He asked. Miguelo turned and sprung from the chair, pulling the boy into a somewhat overzealous embrace.
Vaughn! Thank heavens you're all right. We were all worried sick about you. Hey, I'm fine.
He carefully dislodged himself, noting that Miguelo still clutched the letter.
Fine.
His expression quickly turned.
Don't be so sure. You're in big trouble, young man.
Vaughn hung his head.
Oh. Right. It was a downright blessing for us to receive such a kind consul. What were you thinking disrespecting him like that? Mijlo. Look. I'm really sorry. I was just sick of the occupation, you know? This is our country, and...
He sighed with resignation.
I didn't mean to embarrass you. Embarrass me? My goodness, Vaughn, you could never embarrass me. I was scared, that's all. I bet Penelo's embarrassed, though. Oh. You haven't heard. Heard what? Vaughn. Don't take this the wrong way. I don't blame you, not one bit. It was while you were unconscious, when she was there in the crowd with you. One of those pirates, Bolthier, he just grabbed her. I was too far away to intervene, or believe me, I would have, but, well. What do you mean he grabbed her? I'm gonna clean his clock. No, no, it's worse than that. He has a bounty on his head like I've never seen, and someone must have, well, look for yourself.
Miguello handed him the scrap of paper he had been wringing in his hands, and immediately Vaughn knew he was in deeper than he could handle. The letter was intended for Bolthier and signed by Bugamnon, undoubtedly one of the headhunters that had come to the prison in search of him, and only a brief look at the content revealed such horrifying expressions as trade-off, conditional surrender, and your girl. Vaughn's knees went weak.
Oh, no. He thinks she's Bolthier's girlfriend.
Miguello shook his head wearily.
She pushed him away and went running into the crowd, and I tried to follow her, but... Oh, if anything happens to that sweet girl, why, I've your parents' memory to consider.
Miguello,
it's not your fault,
Vaughn reassured him, placing a hand on his shoulder.
We're gonna fix this. Now, I don't want you involved, too. If I hadn't been so stupid, none of this ever would have happened. Vaughn.
And then it hit him, the law of exchange.
I can talk to Bolthier,
Vaughn assured Miguello.
We kind of got to know each other in prison. He's not exactly the greatest guy in the world, but I know he wouldn't want Penelo to get hurt because of him, and supposedly he has an airship, so it's really just a matter of guilting him into cooperating. A pirate? Are you sure? Don't worry. It'll be fine. I shudder every time you say that.
Bolthier's instruction had been quite accurate, for they found him lounging in the Sandsea Tavern with Fran, both casually ignoring the stares they received from the other customers. Finding a smart-mouthed Arcadian in Robinaster had lost its novelty long ago, but never before had a Vieira set foot out of Galmore jungle, much less into a seedy human bar, and the shock was more than evident. Vaughn, however, had no interest in Fran's purpose any longer and directed his energy straight at her partner.
Bolthier.
The pirate turned, unimpressed.
That was quick. We have a problem,
Vaughn continued, stepping up to them with Miguello close behind.
My sister was kidnapped.
He held out the letter, which Bolthier regarded disinterestedly before taking.
They think you've got a thing for her.
He ran his eyes over the scrawling thread, at last showing some expression of care.
The little blonde? I suppose anything's possible. Anything, indeed.
Miguello stepped forward.
If you hadn't felt the need to grope the nearest skirt, she'd be safe at home where she belongs. I take it you're the proud father.
Bolthier groaned, handing the letter off to Fran.
Something of the sort,
huffed Miguello. Fran took one look at the paper and rolled her eyes with an exhausted sigh.
The gods are toying with us. So, let me get this straight,
Bolthier continued to Vaughn.
I saved your life, busted you out of prison, and returned you safe and sound to your home, and now that I've been in town all of 5 minutes, you see fit to order me out on a half-assed rescue mission for some girl I hardly even know. Damn it! Come on, Bolthier. She's the nicest person in the world. She doesn't deserve this. We'd pay you if we could,
Miguello added.
There must be something we can do for you.
Bolthier and Fran exchanged glances, but didn't seem to think on the subject for more than a second.
Well,
the pirate answered somewhat spiritedly,
your audacity is less than charming, but I just can't say no to desperation. Bugamnon is a problem we've been meaning to deal with for some time now, anyway.
What? Asked Vaughn.
Just like that. I've never been one for punishing the innocent.
He stood and walked past Miguelo, granting him only a passing glance.
If you really want to thank me, old man, you can pick up our tab. Hey!
Vaughn clumsily took chase.
I'm coming with you. Don't get yourself all worked up, Vaughn,
said Bolthier.
We want you to come. Why? Because there's no way in hell the little lady's going to trust either of us. Oh. Right.
He shrugged at a rather bewildered Miguelo and followed them toward the door.
Be careful,
Miguelo called. The letter had instructed the pirates to come to the Lhasa mines in the sky city of Bujerba, which of course, was only reachable by airship. Once there, a trade would be made, Bugamnon would take Bolthier, and Fran would take Penello. Clearly, Bolthier would not be following this plan, but Vaughn understood full well that neither would Bugamnon, so having Vaughn along for the ride gave Bolthier a bit more edge, though it seemed unlikely that the bounty hunter would be alone. Bolthier, however, seemed but minimally concerned with such matters, and obliged Vaughn's rampant inquiries with almost suspicious civility, though Fran made no effort to disguise her irritancy. Bolthier explained the danger of the situation, but Vaughn remained undeterred, explaining his unavoidable furor over any mishap that should befall his dear sister at the pirates' hands, but Bolthier really didn't appear to care. Presently, they reached Robin Astor's massive aerodrome, one of the greatest airship docking stations in Evelise, though it earned such fame only because the city had no seaport, and thus compensated for missed trade through increased air travel. Though people of many races milled about the area, loading and unloading transports, welcoming newly arrived friends and family, seeing others off, and all other manner of activity that such a setting warranted, most seemed wary of Fran and Bolthier, some having heard of their ferocity, no doubt, but most, Vaughn assumed, unsettled by the sight of a Vieira. Oddly, Vaughn found his new notoriety quite rewarding. The docking station the pirates led him to housed a magnificent Arcadian vessel large enough to hold perhaps 10 passengers comfortably, and 20 or so in a bind. Its surface sported a well-polished shine, painted with gold and red and a few touches of white, and its design invoked feelings of nobility, though the presence of its owners dispelled this air almost instantly. Stepping into the craft's shadow, Vaughn couldn't help but release a dumbfounded whoa, which got a proud smirk out of Bolthier.
This is the Strahl,
he said casually, being quickly answered by Vaughn.
You really are a sky pirate. Well, the headhunters seem to think so.
And Fran added glibly,
you could buy your own ship for the price he fetches. So is she armed?
Vaughn asked, looking over the ship giddily and daring to run his fingers along the satin-smooth side panel.
How fast is she? Hey, don't touch my baby!
Bolthier replied, typing a code into the keypad beside the door.
Come on in and see for yourself.
The entry ramp promptly lowered, and Vaughn followed him in, Fran right behind them. The Strahl's innards proved no less awe-inspiring than its shell, holding a roomy cockpit and a well-equipped cabin, though Vaughn felt somewhat disheartened by the overwhelming influence of Arcadian decor built into it. Despite wielding a rather compact engine, the ship appeared armed to the teeth and then some, and Bolthier's piloting would soon prove it to be as agile as the smallest of birds. The navigation systems were clearly quite advanced, military-grade, at least, and its cargo hold yielded nearly twice as much as most others of ships so proportioned.
Holy crap!
Vaughn exclaimed, looking over the arsenal as he entered.
How can that little engine handle all this? Brains over brawn, of course,
Balthier replied.
Why isn't your army using this stuff? Latest model. Not even on the market yet. And I don't have an army. Thanks to Bal's ingenuity, this is the only model in existence,
Fran added wryly.
What?
Vaughn scoffed.
You invented this, too? No,
said Balthier.
I'm afraid we owe this little beauty to a pair of attention-deficit maniacs over at Drockler. I had no choice but to rescue her. Sure.
Balthier and Fran took their seats in the cockpit, and Balthier gestured thoughtlessly to the second row.
Strap yourself in. She's a bit temperamental.
Vaughn obeyed, and the pirates deactivated the gear lock and powered up the navigational controls. He had never been to Bujerba, though he knew many who had, and for the time being found himself with no other choice but to trust Balthier and Fran to get him past the border patrol. Bujerba had long been an ally of Dalmasca, and the treaties between the two now belonged to the Empire, most notably, rights to the magicite trade. The floating islands possessed the most extensive magicite mines in the world, and Arcadia now held a near monopoly on the stones, taking the best to power their airships and other military craft, and then sending the remaining notable specimens to Arcades and a few other cities of renown or royal favor, leaving the leftovers, the weakest stones, for the world market. However, with Vane seated on the Dalmascan throne, Robin Astor at least would undoubtedly earn a claim to the higher end of this trade, and, with any luck, a ship bound out of it would be given little mind when passing into Bujerba. As pirates, however, Fran and Balthier didn't seem willing to take any chances.
The shortest way is over Dorstones,
Fran noted.
The shortest way?
Asked Vaughn. Balthier clarified,
shortest if you're looking to avoid any imperial entanglements. Bujerba isn't involved with the Empire,
Vaughn protested.
Of course not,
he scoffed.
She's free as can be. For now. I hear the Imperials have been massing there for the last week or so. Oh, no.
Vaughn flopped back in his seat as the engines powered up.
The latest says the flagship of the 8th Fleet docked 2 nights ago,
Balthier went on, checking the digital map on the control panel, which showed all too clearly that the main Bujerban aerodomes had indeed been swamped with military-grade vessels.
Getting ready to shift the assignment of the judge's working Vane's security detail, among other things.
He mused.
You must have some good connections,
said Vaughn.
Not particularly. Fran's just got big ears.
At this Fran cast a glare his way, and he quickly corrected himself.
Ah, good ears, I mean. Hold on.
The hatch in the ceiling rumbled to a stop, now open to the bright desert sky, and the straw lifted agilely from the dock, then bucked as the engines throttled forward. Vaughn clamped himself down in his seat, glaring at Balthier and Fran as they exchanged smirks, but decided against saying anything, resolved to just be grateful that they had agreed to help. Penello, he knew, would not be in the least bit happy to have him rescue her alongside pirates, but the situation left little room for propriety or ethics. Costs didn't concern him, he was going to save his sister.